I'm usually pretty conscious of how I open my videos. I mean, obviously the idea is to never bore you guys right out the gate, so I always try my best to, avoid repeating myself for no reason or giving you guys extra information you don't really need. Basically, I care about your time. But sometimes things just need to be repeated, and that extra information you don't need is actually flavor text you do need. And the flavor text here that always bears repeating? I love Shadow the Hedgehog, and you can take that any damn way you choose. I'm not even embarrassed.
Hey, I'm sorry I didn't see you there. I was too busy blocking out the haters.
But in a nutshell, Shadow is a character in the Sonic series who has always been important to me. The reasons for this are many, and we'll probably get into a lot of them as we make our way through this video, but suffice it to say, I made an instant connection with him on his series debut all the way back in 2001. And between then and over the years that followed, I wasn't the only one. There's a reason that even the titular character himself sometimes has to play second fiddle to Shadow. His popularity is insane, which makes it more important than ever that they get his character right for this movie. Now, this video isn't going to be a general review of the movie, where, among other things, we make fun of Mufasa for performing worse. I'll just be doing that in my head. This video will purely be a character analysis of Shadow in the movie, chock full of spoilery goodness. Consider that your warning. Sonic Movie 3 will be where a whole new audience of fans are introduced to Shadow and Maria, and I'm really excited to see what their main takeaway will be.
I know you do. I know the Shadow falls in love with Maria. Whoa!
Of course mainstream media wasn't ready for their wholesome platonic relationship. Well, let's get started on setting that record straight, shall we? We open to stormy seas battering the small rocky coastline of Prison Island, a secret military base off the coast of Japan belonging to the Guardian Units of Nations. Inside lies a dangerous weapon of untold power, held under lock and key and guarded 24/7 by a battalion of soldiers. One of the soldiers says that he hates being on duty here, remarking that the place gives him the creeps. But the lab tech reassures him, saying that the popsicle they're guarding hasn't even moved in 50 years. That popsicle, of course, is our boy Shadow. As he slumbers in stasis, Shadow appears dead to the world outside. But on the inside, his mind still races. Memories of Live and Learn on an acoustic guitar, absolutely sublime by the way, play over pleasant memories of time he spent with a young girl, holding hands as they take in the night sky filled with stars. But those pleasing memories are quickly interrupted by painful ones. In a scene familiar to anyone who knows Shadow's backstory, he remembers fleeing down a long hallway hand in hand with his friend, their footsteps frantic and their breaths panicked as their pursuers close in on them. In the chaos, Shadow remembers losing his grip on her hand, and like the shock of a startling nightmare, the fear he feels registers in the waking world. The equipment used to monitor him shows increased brain activity and heart rate. And to make things worse, someone appears to be hacking into the base's systems in an attempt to release Shadow. Every soldier on the base is deployed to secure him, all with their weapons trained on his pod. But like leaves in the wind, they have no idea how hopelessly outmatched they are. Would it really be an opening Shadow the Hedgehog fight scene if we didn't get a nod to the very first time we seen him chaos snap all over the place while kicking ass? Because that's exactly what we get here. Poor guys didn't even get a chance to fire a round off. Shadow just snaps in and out of sight, taking each of them out with a single hit. The movie does an awesome job of showing just how effective Shadow is in combat. His Chaos Snap makes him look unstoppable, and it's no accident the spectacle of him using it mirrors Shadow Generation so well. This movie will sell that game, and anyone seeing the amazing shit that Shadow pulls off here will definitely be happy to know they can also do it in the games. With his obstacles now squashed, Shadow blasts his way out of the base, staring out at the city of Tokyo across the bay. And this is probably an ideal moment to mention that Shadow is both designed and animated to perfection in this movie. Like, I know it's obvious to anyone with functioning eyes that the CGI in this movie is somehow leagues ahead of the previous two, but I feel that of all the characters in the series, that's probably most important for Shadow. Alongside being the quiet, brooding, tragic deep thinker, Shadow's amazing design and slick-as-hell movement was always tremendously important in portraying him right. And if you think back to every game where he was done well, presentation was always a huge part of it. The way he skates across the water here is both majestic and creepy in equal measure. His head's still and laser focused while the rest of his body moves at speed, just like a predator pursuing its prey. It's perfection, and that's obviously why it made it into so many of the trailers and why it rounds out the movie's opening chapter. The movie shifts away from Shadow for a bit after his escape and focuses on Team Sonic, where the family are celebrating the anniversary of Sonic's arrival on Earth. There's not a whole lot to analyze here in relation to Shadow, save for a heart-to-heart talk between Sonic and Tom. See, just like in Sonic Adventure 2, the source material being adapted for this movie, the theme for this story is duality. In this case, comparing the lived experiences of both Sonic and Shadow and observing the very contrasting outcomes for them. When Sonic asks Tom if he thinks Longclaw would be proud of him, Tom assures him she would, because he never let the pain of losing her change who he is. He explains to Sonic that life comes down to the choices we make, saying that knowing Sonic, he'll probably make some bad ones, but that when it comes to what's important, he'll listen to his heart and make the right ones when it matters most. Sonic says he doesn't know what he'd do without Tom, remarking that he'd probably be a totally different hedgehog as we cut to Shadow, alone and soaking wet on the rainy streets of Tokyo. As a taxi narrowly avoids running over him, even though he's on a zebra crossing, Shadow notices a neon billboard displaying the current year. But as he tries to wrap his mind around being trapped for 50 years, he's suddenly accosted by an army of gun soldiers who've been sent to recapture him. You can clearly see by Shadow's facial expressions how mentally drained he is. He doesn't even seem to want to fight. Unlike his game counterpart at the same point in his story, here Shadow starts out aimless, purposeless. I don't get the impression that he thought of much past his freedom because, as he says himself, he just wants to be left alone. Once again though, Gun has bitten off more than they can chew, and finally realizing they're totally outmatched, call in Team Sonic to clean up their mess. I have to admit, I nerded out a little bit, and by a little bit, of course I mean quite aggressively, once I seen how Team Sonic is first introduced to Shadow. That awesome smoky silhouette of Shadow looking exactly like it did when you first see him in Sonic Adventure 2? That shit is just so beautifully subtle. Not to mention, totally meaningless to a general audience, yet there it is. During Sonic and Shadow's first exchange of words, they argue about which hedgehog looks like which. And I'm not gonna lie, the anticipation of one of them dropping the faker bomb here had me clutching my popcorn like it owed me money. But alas, no fakers.
Faker.
Not yet anyway. As expected, Shadow calls the conversation a waste of time, warning them all to walk away before they get hurt. In his best Gun World Police voice, Sonic attempts to defuse the situation by asking Shadow to talk with him. But in yet another banger line from Shadow,
"You jumped out of a gun helicopter. There's nothing to talk about."
the combat sequence that follows is fantastic. And despite Sonic's assertion that Shadow can't take them all at once, he does exactly that. More than simply being a mismatched beatdown though, I look at this more like Team Sonic was totally unprepared. They knew nothing about Shadow going in and seemed to have an excess of confidence that meant their guard was down. But either way, Shadow Chaos snaps rings around them and beats them all down, ending with another nod to his own spin-off game and another wasted opportunity for him to call Sonic a faker. How did they fumble such an easy win so hard? Have Sonic call Shadow fake Hedgehog instead of new Hedgehog when they meet, and have Shadow return the favor after he beats him. Easy. And in case you're wondering, no, neither of them says it in the entire movie.
That's no good.
Once again though, it's clear that Shadow doesn't really want to fight. He told them to walk away in the beginning, and once he beats them, he's prepared to leave Team Sonic alive. But of course, in a movie about making bad decisions, Sonic decides to go after him. Poor Shadow. He isn't prepared for just how much movie Sonic talks. He just wants to be left alone, but has the equivalent of a toddler on a sugar rush jabbering in his ear about traffic and his highlights.
The more you talk, the harder I want to hit you.
But proving once again that at this point Shadow isn't really out to hurt anyone, he scales a skyscraper on his motorcycle like a badass and beats Sonic, but leaves him alive and handcuffed to a railing afterward, which, based on how annoying he found him, basically makes Shadow a pacifist. Realizing now that something is definitely not right here, Team Sonic meet with Gun Commander Walters to get some answers. Walters gives them a vague, one-sided, and very abridged version of Shadow's backstory. And right away we see that this movie is very much adapting the source material and not simply copying it, which is absolutely fine. But if you were expecting game canon accurate lore for Shadow, then you might need to adjust your expectations a bit, because this definitely isn't Sonic Adventure 2 the movie, but I don't really think it ever marketed itself as that anyway. Instead of a life form created in a lab using the DNA of Space Satan, Shadow was instead found inside a meteor that crashed to Earth 50 years ago. I have to admit, at first I was quite startled at the amount of lore this intro takes and throws it all away. No bio-lizard prototype to precede him, which I kinda figured, and no alien pact with Gerald to create him. That alone changes so much about Shadow's origins, not to mention his character arc in the games that followed Sonic Adventure 2. But then the kinda obvious occurred to me. Did the meteor he was discovered in break off the Black Comet as it passed by Earth on its 50-year cycle? Because that's a neat and tidy way of including his ties to the Black Arm aliens if they choose to cover Black Doom in the future. Anyway, instead of cures for illnesses or the answer to immortality like in the games, Walters explains that it's Shadow's chaos energy that Gun was interested in, set to change the course of humanity forever, but ultimately ending in tragedy after a lab accident took human lives. The lead scientist on the project was blamed and imprisoned, and Shadow was swept under the rug, sent into stasis in full knowledge that it was Commander Walters who put him there. With so few people that even know Shadow exists, Gun's list of suspects in freeing him is short. But before Walters can say anything further, the group is attacked by what looks to be Eggman drones. Walters is severely injured, and with what looks to be his dying breath, gives Sonic one of two keys to the most powerful weapon Gun has ever built, saying he trusts nobody more with keeping it safe. So while Team Sonic are busy teaming up with Eggman to find the person who stole his drones in the hopes they might lead them to the Dark Hedgehog, lacking in purpose or anywhere else to go, Shadow makes his way back to the abandoned gun base he used to call home, where a lone roller skate in a pile of rubble whisks his mind back 50 years, and we finally get an honest and more detailed version of Shadow's past. As granddaughter of the lead scientist, Maria is looking for her room on her first day at the lab. She gets directions from a young Commander Walters, but still ends up getting distracted by an empty room with a creature floating inside a tank. You get the immediate impression from the soldiers that Maria's presence on the base is an oddity. For some, a flat-out hindrance. The young blonde girl on roller skates navigating halls of lab coats and armed soldiers definitely stands out like a sore thumb. But that is the implied sway of the lead scientist for this project. With classic childhood curiosity and no doubt emboldened by being the granddaughter of the boss, Maria walks into the empty lab to get a closer look. But as she's about to touch the glass, Shadow quickly turns around and startles her. There is something unbelievably innocent and beautiful about this scene. When Shadow turns to face her, his facial expression is so cold and stern. And Maria, after recovering from the fright, tries to smooth things over and apologize for maybe frightening Shadow by giving him a smile. But Shadow gives her nothing. And how Maria deals with this is one of the most wholesome things you'll ever see. She gives Shadow one of those, see, I can scrunch my face up all mean too looks, in the most indignantly preteen way possible, before drawing a cute little bunny rabbit face over his on the tank. She point blank refuses to take him seriously. Undeterred by his attempts to push her away, she immediately sets to work on tearing his walls down. And you can see it actually working. Shadow's expression begins to soften. But what seals the deal is when she presses her hand to the glass and asks him to do the same. As a lab specimen, Shadow is accustomed to humans only approaching him when they want something from him. He's been a resource to be extracted from at their whim. But here is someone who actually wants to connect with him. Someone who is reaching out to him and expecting nothing in return. And right then and there, an unbreakable bond was formed. And from that point on, the two were inseparable. Shadow gave Maria a friend in her lonely childhood in a base full of adults, and Maria was Shadow's guide to humanity, and the only person in his life who liked him for him. He danced and played with her so she never got lonely, and she kept him sane during tests and gave him an escape with movie nights and deep conversations beneath the stars. Turns out the bio-lizard did make it into the movie after all, by the way. We were all wrong. After noticing Shadow looking down during a movie called Alien Freak, Maria sneaks him out of the base to go look at the stars. She tells him that it can take hundreds of years for a star's light to reach the Earth, and that oftentimes the light we see is from stars that are long gone. This seems to resonate with Shadow, and he thinks on it for a bit. But breaking the silence, Maria wonders out loud which one Shadow might have came from. He says he remembers nothing about his home, but Maria smiles and corrects him, telling him that Earth is his home. Unable to keep it inside anymore, Shadow asks Maria if she thinks he's dangerous, saying that he sees the way the scientists look at him, and it's exactly how people looked at that creature in the movie they watched. He doesn't know what he is. And it's here that Movie Maria absolutely nails the most important thing about the character. An absolute gold standard in friendship and the ability to see the light even in the darkest places. She tells Shadow that he is her friend, that he can do or be anything he wants, not because of his power, but because of who he is in his heart. And like Sonic said to Tom at the beginning, Shadow says he doesn't know what he'd do without her. The movie doesn't reveal the circumstances around Maria's death here though, instead saving it for late in the story when Shadow needs the biggest push. But we do now have an understanding of why she was so important to him. There's no arguing that Shadow's Maria in the game universe is definitely not the same as his Maria in this movie. You can tell a lot had to be left on the cutting room floor to make this story work for a general audience, not to mention fitting it into a movie runtime. There's no dying promise, no crippling illness to cure her of. Maria in this movie is, for lack of a more poetic description, basically just a kid. An innocent young girl who looks past Shadow's broody and stern outer facade and wants to be his friend. She's the only person who looked past the dangerous science experiment and seen the person inside. The only person in his life who told him he was good. The only person to make a science lab inside a military base feel like home. So Shadow builds a door in as many emotional walls for her, and they formed a friendship that bonded them forever. And while that simplifies things a bit compared to the deeper lore of the games, I still think the movie did an awesome job of adapting Shadow and Maria's relationship for the big screen. But beyond the wholesomeness of Shadow and Maria's friendship, we also learned that in the movie universe, Shadow portrayed that impenetrable outer exterior to the world even before Maria's death. He was only ever used to being used and feared. Outside of Maria, nobody ever gave him a chance or even looked at him as anything beyond a lab rat. Here, his general demeanor and outlook on life is less sinister and calculated like in Sonic Adventure 2, and more that, without Maria, he is well and truly purposeless. Rejected by humanity, the only person he ever loved stolen away from him, and then immediately attacked when he dared seek his freedom? Shadow never initially set out to hurt anyone, but his past and present horrors definitely had him on a hair trigger. And when Gerald offers him a purpose that will not only end his pain, but also punish those responsible for Maria's death, that was all it took to push him over the edge. That was when revenge became Shadow's driving force. He knows it's selfish, he never tries to deny that, but all Shadow wants is to end it all while ensuring that those he holds responsible for Maria's death are brought with him. But I noticed that only once Gerald comes on the scene does he start aiming to kill. After Shadow steals the Eclipse Cannon key from him, Sonic pleads with him not to help Gerald and Eggman. He says he knows Shadow is hurting, but not to let that change who he is inside. I guess, hoping that like with Knuckles, his life lessons from Tom might also get through to Shadow. But Shadow says that after 50 years of reliving what Gun did to Maria, this is who he is inside. It's funny, Walter's putting Shadow in stasis probably seemed to him like the humane thing to do. But But from what Shadow said, it basically amounted to 50 years of mental torture, which puts into perspective why Shadow has such a strong grudge against him. When Team Sonic narrowly avoid death by Shadow's black hole marble, it quickly turns into a race between sides to retrieve the second cannon key from Gun HQ. Hero and Dark each devise a plan to infiltrate the base and retrieve the key, but Shadow's frustration begins to take over when he learns he will only play a supporting role. With the gun building right there, he wants to go in himself and destroy anyone who gets in his way. He wants his revenge. But Gerald asks him to be patient, promising him his revenge on a scale unimaginable. Thanks to the holographic equipment built by Tails, Tom successfully retrieves the key by posing as Commander Walters, which really raises some questions about whether or not he's supposed to be dead, because you'd think Rockwell would know, right? But unfortunately for Tom, he runs into Shadow while posing as Walters, and Shadow doesn't hesitate or hold back. Leaving who he thinks is Walters decimated on the floor, Shadow finally has the second key in his possession. His revenge is so close now, but then he sees Tom's hologram wear off. You can see how taken aback he is by this. The guilt is written all over his face, and you definitely get the impression he wouldn't have hit Tom so hard if he knew. But he doesn't have much time to process this before Sonic shows up. Immediately noticing his adoptive father sprawled out on the ground, despair quickly takes over. And seeing Sonic leaning over the body of his loved one, pleading with them to wake up, ignites more painful memories in Shadow, as he's forced once again to confront the moment he lost Maria. Despair turning to anger now, Sonic asks Shadow what he did, but staring at the key in his hand to steel himself for what must be done, Shadow replies,
What I had to.
With the two keys now in their possession, Shadow seems to use Chaos Control to warp himself and the Robotniks onto the Eclipse Cannon. Something which I think is important to note for later. With the Eclipse Cannon now activated and in position above Earth, Gerald tells Shadow it's time to play his final part in their plot. And for the first time, we see his resolve start to waver. He asks Gerald if he thinks this is what Maria would have wanted, to which Gerald says it's not about what Maria would have wanted, it's about what humanity deserve. And sensing that Shadow needs a push, ever the master manipulator, Gerald urges him to remember what she meant to him, to remember what they took from him. And it's now that the circumstances around Maria's death are revealed. As a longtime Sonic fan who is very much acquainted with Shadow's story, and I'm curious how other people in my position see this, Maria's death being changed challenged a lot about how I understand this scenario in my mind. Unlike the game narrative it's adapting, Maria isn't directly gunned down by a gun soldier. Yes, they teased briefly that this was the soldier's intention, but ultimately she's killed off screen in an explosion after that soldier missed their shot and hit a canister of chaos energy. And to be honest, I can make peace with that. For all the jokes I made about looking forward to this moment on the big screen, I also understand that it was very unlikely they were ever going to shoot a kid in this movie. I get it. But the thing that changed the dynamic of this scene most for me is the fact that it's basically Gerald's fault that Maria is killed. Just before it goes down, he's seen fleeing the soldiers with Shadow and Maria, telling them that they want to take Shadow away. Instead of being completely unaware of how her death even transpired, Gerald instead directly involves Maria in trying to evade capture, exposing her to danger instead of just giving Shadow up to keep her safe. Gerald's personal need for Shadow is greatly diminished in this movie, because unlike in the games, he isn't relying on him to create a cure for Maria. So putting his granddaughter's life at risk to avoid giving Shadow up just doesn't make as much sense, especially when the movie gave no time to build Gerald's relationship with Shadow, nor were we told the soldiers' orders were to kill everyone involved with the project. Gerald specifically says they're going to take Shadow away. That was why they were running. Just something that kinda diluted the emotional impact for me a bit. Besides that though, the scene was done really well, and while Shadow doesn't scream out Maria's name, and that's probably a bigger miss than there being no faker line, watching Shadow and Gerald crouch down over Maria's lifeless body, tears of despair in their eyes, still made for a very emotional scene. They both look truly lost, and the brutal reality of such a kind and vibrant child being ripped from the world so horrifically is laid bare. She was Shadow's world, and the reminder of what was taken from him is enough to spur him on. Fueled by anger and despair, he uses his chaos energy to charge the cannon's core, starting the countdown to Earth's annihilation. Gerald now fills Eggman in on their true plan, a suicide mission that will see the Earth destroyed. But even Eggman can see that this is nuts. He tells Gerald they should rule humanity together as a family, to which Gerald responds with one of the most brutal things I've ever heard.
Oh, Ivo. You'll know Maria.
Oof. Analyzing these two is going to be fun, but just as Shadow thinks his work is done, he's faced with a pissed off Sonic in his super form. Shadow scoffs at the idea of Sonic lecturing him for hurting his family, telling him that he now knows the anger and pain he's felt for 50 years, and that Sonic made the same choice he did. I love the devil on Sonic's shoulder roll for Shadow here. In a movie about choices, it gives huge importance to Shadow to be able to challenge Sonic not only physically, but also morally. Sonic tells Shadow that they are nothing alike, but Shadow goes on to spell out for him how wrong he is. Sonic and Shadow's fight scene is awesome. I nearly lost my shit when Shadow took a page out of Knuckles' book and punched Sonic out of his super form. But not as much as when they both reached the Emeralds at the same time and the fight became Super Sonic versus Super Shadow with the Live and Learn guitar riff playing in the background. That, my friend, is fan service at its finest. And it only makes me sorry we had to wait 3 movies for them to embrace more music from the games. The two beat the cosmic crap out of each other across the globe. At first, each of them gives as good as they get, but then Shadow briefly takes the advantage. And it's here we see the devious, more manipulative side of Shadow that we know from Sonic Adventure 2.
Are you alone? Where are your friends? They tried to stop you, didn't they? But you came anyway. Your anger was too much. What kind of hero abandons his friends to pursue revenge? Abandons his family? And here I thought you cared for them. Especially the one, what's his name? Tom?
Not content to just hurt him physically, Shadow chooses to rub salt in Sonic's wounds by pointing out his poor decisions and isolating him from his friends. Even going as far as to mention Tom when it was he himself who put Tom in the hospital. I get the impression in this movie that Shadow hates himself just as much as he hates Gun. Like the scientists who experimented on him, without Maria, he never learned to accept himself, and he can think of no way to hurt Sonic more than by comparing him to himself. Revenge is ugly and lonely, but made much more bearable when you see someone else sink to it as well. And Sonic nearly gives in. With one enraged punch, he launches Shadow out of his super form and onto the moon. He has his fist cocked, his revenge in sight, all while Shadow is shouting at him to finish it. He's right here. But seeing Shadow press his finger to his own chest, ready to die, Sonic can't do it. Remembering what Tom said about not letting his pain change him, Sonic knows this isn't who he is. And Shadow is completely stunned by Sonic sparing his life. Confused, he tells Sonic he won, to take his revenge. But Sonic verbally disarms him completely, saying there are no winners with revenge. In the silence that follows, Shadow finds himself staring once again at the stars, remembering how much Maria used to love looking at them. He tells Sonic that the last time he sat beneath the stars like this, he was with her, and the pain of losing her feels like it's all he's ever known. Sonic tells him he felt the same way after losing Longclaw, but that even though the pain never went away, he learned that the love they felt for each other was stronger than anything, and he tells Shadow that's what he should hold on to. Maria may be gone, but their love for each other is eternal, igniting in Shadow Maria's lesson from long ago. The light shines even though the star is gone. Without the red haze of revenge clouding his mind, Shadow is now aware of the horrible mistake he's made. But just like with Knuckles in the second movie, Sonic extends his hand in friendship, offering Shadow a chance to make the right choice. And like a playful slap on the butt and a kiss on the forehead, Live and Learn starts to play in all its glory as Sonic and Shadow go super again. Personally, I'm kinda partial to the slightly suggestive, angry Wiimote technique in Sonic Adventure 2, but this is also good. And with some playful banter between them already, the two set out to put everything right again. I'm not gonna lie, the hairs on my arm stood on end watching these two destroy a horde of gun mechs while Live and Learn blasted out of the cinema speakers. The fact that even in Ireland the crowd was cheering when the song started just goes to show how much people appreciated the fan service. Not to mention the sheer spectacle of the fight itself. I do have some mixed feelings about how Gerald dies, but those thoughts are probably best left for a video covering him specifically. I think, on balance, the movie's take on the character was a bit harder to get my head around so soon after getting his journal with Shadow Generations. But we'll always have the game lore separate to these movies anyway, so no real harm done, I guess. With Tails, Knuckles, and Eggman trying to steer the Eclipse Cannon away from Earth, it's up to Sonic and Shadow to eat a face full of laser in their super forms until they do. It's all going well until Sonic, probably due to not being as accustomed to chaos energy as Shadow, can't maintain his super form any longer, causing Eggman to... I can't remember what this is called. Please let me know in the comments. Many times. They make the moon canonically accurate to the games, let's put it that way. With Team Sonic out of the picture, it's left to Shadow and Eggman to move the cannon away from Earth before it explodes. Eggman sacrifices his life to do so, and fueled only by his love for Maria, Shadow does the same. But you can dry your eyes because Shadow survives, and we see him retrieving his inhibitor rings in the post-credits. And while they've also insinuated Eggman is dead, and went through great effort to make it more conclusive than in Sonic 2, we've seen that Shadow can use Chaos Control without the emeralds in this movie. So based on the fact that Jim Carrey has once again said he's happy to return for Sonic 4, I'm betting Shadow used Chaos Control in his super form to save him. Or they'll just do some sort of time travel stuff or whatever, but I like my explanation better. As a die-hard Sonic fan and shameless Shadow fanboy, I thought Sonic 3 was beautiful, and what a great way to end the fearless year of Shadow. The most important thing for me going into this movie was how they handled Shadow's character, and all things considered, I think they did a fantastic job. His character beats were mostly on the money, and anywhere things were less than perfect was primarily down to narrative changes around Gerald or Maria. So as everything is presented to us in this universe, Shadow feels pretty much spot on. Plus, we'll always have Sonic Adventure 2 to go back to, so those narrative changes don't really bother me too much. And Keanu Reeves absolutely nailed his performance. And considering how important Shadow's voice work is, being such a deep character, I'm glad they got someone who suits him so well. And as a jumping on point for so many new Shadow fans, I don't think things could have gone much better. I hope you guys enjoyed my character analysis of Shadow in Sonic Movie 3. If you did, don't forget to drop a like on the video and make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I have plenty more Sonic content on the way, movie and game related, so make sure that bell icon is checked to see more from me. Now, I'd love to hear what you guys think. Did you enjoy the third Sonic movie? What did you think of Shadow's characterization and Keanu's performance? And how would you like to see Shadow used going forward? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. But for now, a big thank you for watching. And as always guys, take care.